They say feeling deeply is a gift, a sign of a rich and beautiful soul. But what they don't tell you is how heavy that gift can become when every word cuts deeper, every silence echoes louder, and every goodbye lingers longer than it should. Why do some people feel everything too much? Why does the world seem sharper, colder, more overwhelming through their eyes? This is not sensitivity. This is something quieter, something deeper, a silent intensity that few truly understand. Let's begin. There was a time when it first became noticeable. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in quiet, almost invisible moments. You felt things longer than others did. A small comment stayed with you for days. A shift in someone's tone felt like a storm beneath the surface. Even joy, when it came, felt overwhelming, almost too fragile to hold. People called you sensitive, sometimes gently, sometimes not, as if it were something soft, something simple. But it never felt simple, did it? Because it wasn't just emotion, it was immersion. It was feeling the room before a word was spoken, noticing the tension no one acknowledged, carrying the weight of things that were never yours to carry. Why does everything feel so intense? Why does it linger, echo, expand? For you, emotions don't just pass through, they settle, they sink, like sediment at the bottom of a river, slowly reshaping everything beneath the surface. And over time, it becomes exhausting, not because you are weak, but because you are constantly absorbing more than most people even notice. So you begin to question yourself. Maybe you're overreacting. Maybe you're imagining things. Maybe you just need to be less. But what if this intensity was never something you chose? What if it's simply the way your inner world was built, to feel not just what is seen, but everything that remains unspoken? Sensitivity like this rarely appears out of nowhere. It has roots, quiet ones, often buried so deeply that even you may not remember where it began. Sometimes it starts in places where emotions were unpredictable, a home where warmth and distance existed side by side, where love was present but inconsistent, where you had to learn, early on, to read between the lines. You watched closely. You listened carefully, not because you wanted to, but because you had to. A shift in tone meant something. Silence meant something. Even the smallest change in energy carried meaning. And slowly, without realizing it, you became attuned, not just to words, but to what lived underneath them. In other cases, it wasn't chaos, but absence. Feelings unspoken, needs unnoticed, moments where you felt something deeply, but had nowhere for it to go. So it stayed inside, unprocessed, unreleased. And over time, that inner space became fuller, heavier, like an empty well that kept collecting rain but was never drained. You learned to hold everything, your emotions, other people's emotions, the tension in a room, the weight of what was never said, but no one ever taught you how to let it go. Was this sensitivity or survival? Because when a mind grows in environments where it must constantly scan, interpret, and adapt, it doesn't just become aware, it becomes hyper-aware. And that awareness doesn't disappear with time. It stays, quietly shaping how you see the world, how you feel it. What if this isn't just emotional, but biological? What if the way you feel is not an exaggeration, but a difference in how your mind processes the world? Some brains are simply more responsive, more attuned to emotional signals, more reactive to subtle shifts that others overlook entirely. It begins in quiet systems beneath awareness, the parts of the brain that scan for meaning, for safety, for connection. They don't rest easily. They notice everything. A glance that lingers too long, a pause in conversation, a message that feels slightly off. Where others move on, your mind stays, not because it wants to, but because it is wired to look deeper. There are tiny mechanisms at play, reflections within reflections. When someone feels something, you feel it too, not as observation, but as experience. And so emotions don't stay external, they become internal. Why does it feel like you're carrying more than your share? Why does the world feel louder, even in silence? Because your mind is constantly translating, turning subtle signals into full emotional experiences, expanding a moment into something layered, complex, hard to ignore. And when there is no clear answer, no resolution, the mind doesn't stop. It loops, replays, searches for meaning where there may be none. This is why just stop overthinking never works, because it was never just thinking, it was processing, deep, continuous, and automatic. Not a flaw, not a failure, but a nervous system that feels more and carries it longer. There is a quiet conflict that lives beneath all of this, a tension that no one else can fully see. Part of you wants to feel less, to let things go the way others seem to hear something hurtful and simply move on. But another part of you won't allow it. It holds on, it replays, it searches for meaning in every detail, every pause, every word left unsaid. And so you exist in between depth and exhaustion, between awareness and overwhelm. Why can't you just switch it off? Why does your mind return to things long after they've passed? Because letting go for you doesn't feel like relief. It feels like losing something important, like ignoring a signal that might matter. So you stay with it, even when it hurts. You analyze conversations that others have already forgotten. You question your reactions. You wonder if you felt too much, said too much, cared too much. And slowly this turns inward. You begin to guard yourself, not because you don't want to connect, but because connection feels intense, unpredictable, heavy. So you withdraw, just a little. You become quieter, more careful, more selective with what you reveal. But even in silence, the feelings don't disappear. They stay inside, circling, expanding. And this is the part no one talks about. That feeling deeply is not just about emotion. It's about carrying an internal world that rarely rests. A world that is always processing, always feeling, always trying to make sense of things that were never simple to begin with. And then, slowly, almost quietly, something begins to shift. Not in the world around you, but within the way you see yourself. There comes a moment, sometimes after exhaustion, sometimes after distance, when you begin to notice a pattern. That this depth, this intensity, has always been there, across different people, different places, different versions of your life. And for the first time, a question emerges, not from self-criticism, but from curiosity. What if this isn't something to fix? What if this is something to understand? Because not everyone feels this way. Not everyone notices the same details, carries the same weight, or processes emotions with the same depth. And that realization can feel disorienting, even isolating. If others don't feel it this deeply, then why do you? Is something wrong or just different? For so long, the instinct may have been to shrink, to become less reactive, less expressive, less affected, to match a world that seems more distant, more detached. But awareness begins to change that. You start to see that what you once called too much may simply be a different threshold, a different way of experiencing reality. Not exaggerated, not imagined, just deeper. And in that awareness, something softens. The constant self-questioning begins to loosen. The need to justify every feeling begins to fade. Because for the first time, you're not asking, how do I stop this? You're asking, what does this mean about me? And that question opens a different kind of door,
And perhaps the shift is not about becoming less, but about learning how to hold what is already there. Because the depth never truly disappears. It was never meant to. But the way you relate to it can change. At some point, you begin to notice that not every feeling needs to be followed. Not every emotion needs to be solved. Not every silence carries a hidden meaning. And this realization doesn't arrive loudly. It comes quietly, like the settling of water after a storm. You start to create space, not by pushing feelings away, but by allowing them to exist without immediately absorbing them. There is a difference between feeling something and becoming it. And slowly, that difference becomes visible. You begin to sense where you end and where others begin, where an emotion belongs to you and where it was simply passing through. It's subtle, almost invisible, but it changes everything. Because now the weight is no longer carried in the same way. It is noticed, acknowledged, but not always held. And in that space, something unfamiliar appears. Not numbness, not detachment, but a quieter kind of strength. The kind that doesn't come from resisting depth, but from coexisting with it. From knowing that feeling deeply is not the problem. It never was. The problem was believing you had to carry it all, alone.
There is something both beautiful and heavy about feeling everything so deeply. It means the world reaches you in ways others may never fully understand. The quiet moments, the unspoken emotions, the invisible shifts that most people pass by without noticing. You see them, you feel them, you carry them. And for a long time, it may have felt like a burden, like something that made life harder than it needed to be. But perhaps it was never meant to be judged that way. Because within that depth, there is also connection, a rare kind of awareness, a sensitivity to life that, when held gently, can become something steady, something meaningful. You were never too much. You were simply experiencing more in a world that often feels less. And that difference can feel lonely at times, but it also means there are parts of life that only you truly notice, only you truly understand. And maybe that is not something to erase, just something to hold with a little more gentleness. If this video made you feel seen, if parts of this reflection felt quietly familiar, then perhaps there is nothing wrong with the way you feel. Perhaps there never was. There are others who move through the world like this too, quietly carrying depth, noticing more than they say, feeling more than they show. You are not alone in this experience, even if it has felt that way for a long time. And if you'd like to stay connected, this space will always remain open, a place where the quieter, deeper parts of being human are explored with care. If you feel comfortable, you're welcome to share your thoughts below, not because you have to, but because sometimes your words can help someone else feel a little less alone.